This channel is supported by truefire. Truefire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Kid and wife went to Disneyland. I was at home looking after the dogs, and I briefly went out with my buddy Chris to Project Music, and whilst I was there, they kind of asked, have you seen this Rocky guitar? And I was like, what's a Rocky guitar? I thought it was a boxer. Anyway, it turned out it was this George Harrison replica piece, and they made 100 of them. Paul Waller did. It was being sold for £21,995, and I kind of got a chance to glimpse at some of the comments on that, and there was one particular that was kind of calling out Fender and Gibson for being kind of like greedy. I thought, is this about greed or is it about something else? And I kind of thought it might be interesting to talk about it a bit. I think the first thing that happened in this realm was John Mayer's Black One, BLK1, where John Cruz built 83 of these like spot-on replicas of John Mayer's Black One guitar. Now they sold for, at the time, I think $15,000, and those have kind of skyrocketed in value. I think the one sold for like £50,000 or something like that. Like, a lot of money. I think it's a little bit of a one-off sort of situation, because I kind of looked at what the initial price was of the George Harrison Rocky, and those were selling for 23 grand, 23,099 pounds, or something like 25,000 euros, double what the initial John Mayer things were selling for. The thing is that those have not appreciated it in value in the same way. Now, of course, there's still time, I guess, for that to happen. It didn't seem like they've caught that kind of lightning in a bottle type thing with that one. Obviously, these are crazy amounts of money for anyone to be spending on a guitar, but I kind of figured that they're not really for most of us, right? They're not for someone playing gigs on them even, really, most likely, right? Because these things are, you know, have a ticket price of £15,000, £20,000. Like, reasonably, you wouldn't expect necessarily people to be gigging them. And even John Mayer's letter that he wrote in the Black One, kind of insinuates that probably most of the buyers are going to be collecting them, but he's saying like you should play them, they'll get better over time. And you may never want to sell them because you play them. And there's a couple of guys, I was watching Justin Jeski's video on the Mayer Black one. He's got a couple of friends that have them, and they're like some of the best guitars that those guys have ever played, or the best strats at least. And so that's kind of one of those things where it's like, this is what I thought about the Paul Waller one as well, which like all of us in that shop, like, we're not really expecting it to be a particularly great guitar for some reason. I don't know, just you put a £22,000 price tag on a thing and you think, well, how is it actually going to play? It's played really well, and to the point where I thought it's kind of a shame that in some ways it's probably going to end up, you know, someone buying it just as an investment, in which case if you bought it as a collector or as someone investing in this gear, it's probably not a good idea to then continue playing that thing and do anything but keep it in its case and keep it in perfect condition. It seems to me that this is like Fender and Gibson have done it as well, more just trying to package up something which is kind of readily made for people to sort of take a flyer on and see if in 10, 20 years they might have doubled their money or something like that. I kind of looked into this a little bit more. So if you take like the list price of these George Harrison Rocket guitars, which is something like 23 grand, you imagine that if it's got margin like normal instruments, then 70% or something like that might be, then you kind of do the math on that, it's like less than 1% of Fender's annual income on that particular project, you know, which was a run of 100 guitars. And if you look at the amount of work that had gone into each individual guitar, I think it is a pretty astonishing amount of work, and it can't have just been Paul Waller by himself, but there is some detail about the process that went into making those guitars, which is, you know, they had to select like the right sort of flame mixed with bird's eye maple, so finding that enough to make 100 similar-ish looking necks, right, or similar sort of grain bird's eye and stuff like that. So that's not that easy in itself. Building 100 Sonic Blue body blanks, you know, strat blanks, is obviously like, that's nothing to Fender, right? I think they got Abbey to do the pickups, so winding 100 sets of pickups, I don't know how much time any of that would take. And then kind of, I think it was basically done on like a paint by numbers sort of, they created a template for it, and then I think he said it was something like 17 different day glow colours that went into building that. And if you look at the guitar, there's also like a little decal on the back here, and then there's glitter and all of this stuff on the guitar, that it really is quite astonishing to look at. Not necessarily in a good way, but you know, if you were looking for something that looked pretty much very close to this rocky guitar, if you were a huge fan of the Beatles, then I guess you'd be pretty pleased with that thing. Can I imagine that it took 4 times the amount of work that a normal master built guitar would take to build, or 3 times? Absolutely. So in that way, you know, like the paint job, it's had a normal paint job anyway, and then you've gone on with like 17 other colours with like meticulous, you know, replicating a pretty sloppy paint job. They've still done it note for note, if you like. They've toured it. So I kind of thought, yes, it's a crazy amount of money for an instrument, but at the same time it's also like a big sort of project in a way. And then I guess this similar sort of thing with the black ones, where if you see a couple of them up close, there is a pretty big level of detail that's gone into them, and I think those again were like $15,000 each. If you want just a great playing guitar, then you definitely don't need to spend anywhere near that much on a guitar to get it. And it's a similar situation with the Gibson Greenie replicas, because they've done like an Epiphone one, which is really not very close at all. It's just like a Les Paul standard with Greenie pickups. And then they did another one, which is like the Gibson Les Paul faded, but with those pickups. And then they did like these more limited runs where I think they were like 20 grand or something like that. I think these are guitars that are just built with it in mind that there's people out there that are looking to invest in these guitars and collect them, and maybe they're trying to compete with the vintage guitar market. Because actually, if you look into it, but in 1954, I think that the estimate is something like as little as maybe 200 strats were made, but you know, even a 1954 strat is going to be less scarce than these limited master built runs. So, you know, all that to justify you going out and spending 22 grand on a strat, which looks kind of funny. But yeah, so I don't know about, I think the PRS Silver Sky is proof, as well as John Cruz's own efforts, that you do really need this lightning in a bottle effect, where, you know, you mix John Cruz, a master builder, with John Mayer, who has like a cult following of players that are wanting to get the same gear and stuff like that, and then you mix it with the Fender name. You need kind of all three of those things to hit perfectly for it to create this thing. Whereas like a PRS Silver Sky, they're discounted quite a lot of the time. That's a John Mayer piece of gear, and you know, in many respects I think it's probably by many players considered to be kind of a similar level of quality to a Fender custom shop thing, maybe not a Fender master built thing. You don't get the same sort of Mayer effect with the Silver Sky, which is kind of interesting, right? Anyway, I don't know, let me know your thoughts. Is that greed on the part of Fender and Gibson, or is that something else? And I think it's maybe something else, which is more just trying to build these sort of flagship things for people to maybe pour their money into, like whiskey or luxury cars or anything like that. And it's not really even about the player or anything like that. It's just like, what can we do to interest that sort of crowd and compete, I guess, a little bit with the vintage guitar market. That's kind of how I see it. It's not for you or me, probably.